Angoulême was a young lass who looked a great deal like Ciri. Coincidentally, she was also from Sintra. Her mother was a Cintran noblewoman, from a high-ranking family in fact, with their own coat of arms, a sea cat. Unfortunately for Angoulême, however, that same mother slept around a little too much. When she was accused of having slept with a stableman, Angoulême was branded a disgrace. They gave her away to be raised by distant relatives. They managed to send her to school and only very occasionally beat her. They also reminded her often that she was worthless. Her own mother visited her only 3 or 4 times at all and then never returned. When the war broke out, her adoptive parents lost everything, and as they already had 3 children of their own, Angoulême became a burden. They gave her away to an orphanage ran by priests, except it was really a front for a bordello where they offered young children to their customers. Strangely, Angoulême was too old for most of these customers. She was only 15. She found some other older children at the bordello, and they quickly teamed up. They found some knives in the kitchen, waited for some of the regular customers, and killed them on the spot. In all, they killed 2 creeps, 3 priests, and a page. Then they proceeded to torture the temple warden until he gave up the key to the gold coffers, and they were off and out of there. On the road, as only kids, they were often hungry, often beaten, started doing fistek. At that point, Angoulême would eat anything that moved, until one day they joined Nightingale's gang. That didn't go too well. Eventually, they tried to leave again, to no avail. Nightingale's men killed the last 2 boys that had fled the orphanage so long ago with Angoulême, and they had just about spread-eagled Angoulême on a cloak until an officer stopped the gang. Not wanting to take a chance, Angoulême waited for another opportunity to flee. When Shirou, the half-elf, approached Nightingale's gang with a contract on Geralt's life, Angoulême took her chance. She grabbed a bunch of Nightingale's loot and fled a second time, this time succeeding, finding her way to a small town where she intended to sell the information she had in return for clemency. Except, in this small town, Geralt was just now having a conversation with the local authorities. But Angoulême still looked a great deal like Ciri, of course. So much, in fact, that when Geralt first met her, he quite sincerely thought that she was Ciri. Which made it decidedly worse for him to see them treat her so roughly. When he at last realized that this wasn't Ciri, he was astonished a second time, because she seemed to know all about him and even where he was going. But that wasn't all. She also knew that the half-elf Shirou and a crime lord called Homer Stragon, nicknamed the Nightingale, were waiting for the Witcher and his group in Belhaven, where they'd hoped to club him to death. The authorities barely believed her, and the only reason she wasn't getting beaten to a pulp constantly was Geralt's interjections. Curiously, however, she kept insisting that the clemency only included that she be hanged immediately, because it wasn't as bad as being impaled after having one's eyes gouged out and one's bosom torn off with red-hot pincers, apparently. Upon hearing this, Geralt's blood boiled. However, the authorities, also known as Folkel Arteveld, assured the Witcher that Angoulême and her gang had done this and worse to others in their quest for gold and merriment. Be that as it may, Geralt insisted that Angoulême be released into his custody after their little chat was over, and Mr. Folko obliged. The rest of Geralt's gang didn't entirely trust the lass for some time, but they eventually started getting along well enough. Although nobody appreciated her calling everyone nuncle, especially Milva disliked it greatly when Angoulême called her auntie. She also threw the term Hansa into the group, an armed gang linked by bonds of friendship. Geralt's group soon adopted the word as their own, and they were now Geralt's Hansa. Not that Angoulême was used to riding with honorable people at this point, of course. She even tried to thank Geralt by sleeping with him, something that angered, confused, and embarrassed Geralt all at the same time. Angoulême was even upset that he seemed not to want her, but Geralt barked at her not to say another word. At least thanks to Angoulême's warning, Geralt now knew who was waiting for him and decided to set up a plan to capture Shirou the half-elf, instead of the other way around. To that end, Geralt, Angoulême, and Cahir rode up to Belhaven together, where they would pretend that they'd killed Geralt. A terrible plan to begin with, as Angoulême should have known that Shirou knew exactly what Geralt looked like. After all, he was the one who told her about the Witcher to begin with. And as expected, Shirou sees right through them and captures them, assisted by Nightingale himself. Nightingale, who had a problem with Angoulême's flight from his gang and the theft of his pearls and stones. So now he hopped around like a toad, threatening to drive a stake up her backside. That was not meant to be, as the Free Slopes resistance barged in over the hillside just then, attacking with fervor the Nilfgaardian troops that had sided with Nightingale. And as such, they attacked Nightingale as well. Angoulême wrested herself free and slashed her former gang boss in the cheek harshly, almost down to the teeth. She meant to finish the job, but was interrupted by a bomb and a great deal of smoke. The fighting exploded quite hideously, and Geralt seemed to lose control, only interested in murder until Angoulême's yelling brought him back to his senses. Without completing their mission, the trio now tried to painfully make it back to the rest of their Hansa. Geralt eventually sent Angoulême on ahead, as Cahir was wounded, and they travel far too slowly. Angoulême had to warn the others of what had happened. She did so just in time, urging them to enter the Sans-Retour valley of Toussaint, where the bandits would not dare follow. At least, that was the hope. But they eventually did follow. Their mistake. They ambushed Geralt's Hansa while he wasn't there, but soon regretted their actions when the knight-errants of Toussaint showed up to hack them to pieces. They fled into the forest, of course, where they were met with a gigantic, walking tree sent by the druids to pick up any bandits so they might be burned in the wicker cage. And burn they did. And that was that. Angoulême would never again be tormented by Nightingale. For now, the Hansa could relax a while in beautiful Toussaint, where nothing could harm them. Angoulême even bathed and wore a pretty dress for the initial banquet at their arrival, although the rest of the gang did have to convince her quite a bit to avoid saying fuck and arse during said banquet. At least the young knight-errants seemed to enjoy her rather more rambunctious nature quite a bit, vying for her attention. She did such a great job at amusing all the guests, in fact, that the jester was out of a job entirely. She was only outdone once a bear tamer appeared, whose bear took a dump on the floor. It was hard to compete with such an act. They all got pretty sick of Toussaint rather quickly, but at least Angoulême had plenty of time to think on her plans to set up a brothel one day. In Toussaint, of course, because there weren't any good ones as is. Yes, she'd set up a luxury bordello with a big garden, for respectable folk only, of course. Angoulême would be the madam, make a fortune, and eventually become counselor, only for her to elect Milva and Cahir to something or the other. Yes, she had it all planned out quite well. Although she didn't plan to stay in Toussaint until the Witcher had finished his quest, even though Geralt had meant to leave her here when they left. It was safer that way, he thought. Lucky for her, when Geralt did decide to leave, he had changed his mind. Angoulême needed looking after, he noted, and so they were off on the road again, together, until one day they found Stigga Castle, Vilgefortz's castle, where Ciri was held. They barged in together, cutting down mercenaries as they went. Angoulême, too, fought valiantly. Unfortunately, it was not meant to be. All of Geralt's companions died that day, and Angoulême was no different. First, she watched Milva die. Milva, who had meant much to her during their time together, becoming something of a mother figure to the girl. Both foul-mouthed lasses with a short fuse, but Angoulême herself was already wounded and bleeding out fast. Cahir tried to drag her to safety, but they were met with Ciri, closely followed by Bonhart on their way. Bonhart, whom Cahir tried to fend off as best he could, as Ciri dragged the dying Angoulême away. Faintly, she asked Ciri if she'd make her a countess, but Ciri couldn't answer. With a final sigh, Angoulême noted that she should have stayed in Toussaint to start that whorehouse, and then she was gone. The young girl who lived such a dark life, but never lost her sense of humor, the girl who looked so alike Ciri, died in Ciri's arms.
I'm sure you're not surprised, but we're not doing skits at the end cards today either. I am so sorry. My Patreons are getting titles today. I hope you appreciate those too. Walguy the Illustrious, Robertson the Enlightened, Lochmoine the Fierce, MJ Coolsta the Impressive, Septic the Cattist, Mike Zweers the Unrelenting, Adrian Packle the Impeccable, Ray the Fortuitous, Freeman the Wise,